Hello, 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 everybody. It's been a while. It's Susie McMahon for the Susie L. McMahon Virtual Book Club with some wonderful return friends and a new friend here tonight. I'm going to try to point in the right direction, which of course I never can with the reverse cameras. Up on the top of the screen, I have Stephanie and Jonathan, and down below we have Melissa. Say hi, everybody. I feel like we're the Brady Bunch. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Tonight, this is our December virtual book club meeting. I know there's a lot going on out there, but we'll give a couple of minutes for everybody to realize, hey, it's 7 o'clock on the East Coast, and let our friends in the virtual book club join us. We usually have a really strong contingent live from our Texas friends. But tonight, I just want to say we're going to be talking about the wonderful collection, our Prince of Scribes, which is where a bunch of writers, thank you for holding it up for us, Jonathan, where writers and actors and publicists and all kinds of people in the literary world have written just heartfelt entries in their memory and their friendships and their tribute to Pat Conroy. Tonight we have Stephanie and Jonathan joining us. Melissa's going to help co-host, and I'm just going to kick off, if I can, by reading Jonathan's bio, and then I'm going to put the mic to Jonathan for him to introduce his cohort there, Stephanie, okay? So everyone that doesn't know, you might be living under a rock, but Jonathan Haupt is the executive director of the nonprofit Conroy Center and the former director of the University of South Carolina Press, where he created Story River Books, fiction imprint with Pat Conroy, named by Garden and Gun magazine as one of the top 10 things to love about the South. Haupt's book reviews and author interviews have appeared in the Charleston Post and Courier, Low Country Weekly, Beaufort Lifestyle, Savannah Morning News, Beacon Magazine, Southern Review of Books, and Southern Writers Magazine, Sweet Tea Blog. He is the co-editor of the anthology, Our Prince of Scribes, that we're discussing tonight, Writers Remember Pat Conroy, the receipt of 17 book awards. He serves on the boards of the Friends of South Carolina Libraries and South Carolina Academy of Authors. In 2020, Haupt was recognized with the Doug Marlett Literacy Leadership Award presented by the Pulpwood Queens, the largest book club in the United States. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Susie. It's nice to be back.
Yes. Go right ahead and let us know your friend Stephanie that is with you. Tell us about your relationship and introduce us to Miss Stephanie Edwards, please.
I'd be delighted to. So Stephanie is one of the 67 contributing writers to Our Prince of Scribes. And the reason for that is that Stephanie was what I like to think of as an original witness to the writer who would become Pat Conroy. She was a Beaufort High School classmate of Pat's, a couple of years behind Pat at Beaufort High, and was there when Pat was just beginning to self-identify as a writer, as was Stephanie at that time as well. After graduating from Beaufort High, Stephanie went on to have a remarkable career of more than 20 years on Broadway, in Hollywood, as a costumer, as a dancer, doing all kinds of cool stuff, including, but not limited to, working on Michael Jackson's Bad video. You know, of those of us on screen, Stephanie is the only one who can make that claim. But she fell in love with writing all over again, and that brought her back to the Low Country, and eventually to her own first novel, which is this beautiful book right here, What We Set in Motion, which won an award from the Atlanta Writers Conference before it came out, and has done incredibly well, both locally and well beyond Beaufort. Stephanie also leads our local writers critique group right here in the Conroy Center. She's been doing that since long before there was a Conroy Center. And she's just a remarkable teacher and mentor figure to other writers. It's just a blessing to get to know and work with Stephanie here at the Conroy Center.
Welcome, Stephanie. It's so great to know a little bit more about you. That's fantastic. So we as a group read the book Our Prince of Scribes, and I just wanted to have Jonathan explain a little bit about where the idea came, and then Stephanie, when you after he describes how the idea of the book came about, how you first heard about being involved in it would be my question for Stephanie. So Jonathan introduced the book, and then Stephanie, when did she first get interested or hear about being a contributor?
Yeah, okay. We can definitely tackle that chronology. So Pat Conroy passed away March 4th of 2016 from pancreatic cancer, and his battle with cancer lasted just a few very heroic months, most of which he kept private, but he made a public announcement of it around Valentine's Day of 2016, just actually a few weeks before he passed away. And I was at a writers' conference in Columbia, South Carolina, with a lot of folks who knew Pat or had met him along the way. And, you know, everybody was just sort of shocked by this public announcement. And one of the writers there was a writer that Pat and I were about to publish in the Story River Books fiction imprint you mentioned, Susie, a writer from Charleston named Nicole Seitz. And Nicole had put together an anthology of short pieces by writers, including, I think, Pat and Cassandra, as a response to a flood that had happened in South Carolina. So she sort of knew how to put together an anthology and do it very quickly. So she had this idea that we could do this for Pat. We could gather recollections from folks like us who had been mentored by Pat. And maybe we could even do it quick enough that Pat could read it in draft form, that he would actually get to know how much he had meant to so many writers. And there just wasn't time. I mean, the Pat's passing happened so quickly after that. But the idea was already there. The seed was there. And we realized that this wasn't going to be a book that we would do quickly. This was a book we would take our time with and get to as many voices as we could gather together, folks who had known Pat and been mentored by him. And of course, after he passed away, there were eulogies being published and remembrances, including Rick Bragg's in Southern Living and Kathleen Parker's in the Washington Post. So we started recruiting people who we saw that were actively publishing things, putting them into public view. But we also wanted to reach, you know, beyond the sort of celebrity writers and get to other folks in Pat's circle, because it was so inclusive. And it took us about a year and a half to gather what ultimately became 67 essays, including mine, including the introduction. And I will say, if any of us get to the end of our lives and 67 people still like us and want to say nice things about us in print,
and we'll write it down.
That's good. That's a really good sign. It's not everybody, and it was never intended to be everybody. There are many more than 67 writers out there who are Conroy proteges in some sense of that word. But as these essays were coming in for that, you know, first year or so, Nicole and I were really the only two reading them, you know, and weeping about it because they're so personal, and laughing about it because some of them are so hilarious too. It really became this beautiful collection of celebration of life essays. And each one, you know, invariably would lead us to some other writer that we didn't know, but that writer knew him. And it sort of broadened the circle, the constellation, if you will, which led us over time to reach out to folks like Stephanie. And I don't even remember exactly when we reached out to you. Maybe you have a better memory of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. We started the center over on Charles Street in the building that now houses Pickle Juice.
Yes.
Which is Eat, Stay, Play, Buford, websites, everything. They're fabulous. But anyway, we had this little tiny space. And I had said to Cassandra, when this terrible thing happened to Pat, I said, well, whatever it is you do to honor Pat, please just count me in, because, you know, I'm just here for you, whatever. Well, within a very short amount of time, the creative juices of everybody, while mourning Pat's passing, began forming the Pat Conroy Literary Center. And Jonathan was pulled out of Columbia, away from the university, and brought down here, and everything started happening really fast. And I remember I was a volunteer at the time, a docent. So I was giving the tours that they now give here Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for anybody who's coming this way, 12 to 4. They're wonderful, wonderful tours of the center here. You really need somebody to tell you all the details as you go around. And so I was doing that as well and helping out wherever I could. And just one day, Jonathan pops out from his office back into the main room where we were, you know, we'd start our tours, and said, Stephanie, you need to write something about being in high school with Pat. And I was just, oh, this is fabulous. I didn't really know what they were doing with it at the time. There was some kind of book being put together, but I didn't know what it was. And so I went, and I'd been given the tours about Pat's life. And of course, I'm the only one in this arena at the time that could talk about Pat in high school. And that's, of course, before he became Pat Conroy. But he was definitely left his imprint on so many people during that time. So basically, that was it. Jonathan said, if you please put something together, and we'd like to see if we could put it in this book. And then when this book came out, oh my gosh, it was just fabulous. Not only that, but Nicole, who is also an artist, she's a prolific writer and an artist, ended up doing pencil renderings of each of us. And there was a whole
67.
display of those that used to go around from center to center. I
It toured, yeah. It was
it toured,
3 or 4 locations, including, of course, the Conroy Center. You can kind of see her sketch of Pat over Stephanie's shoulder. It's the outer edge of the frame right there. But yeah, the artwork was amazing. This book has lived so many lives above just being a book too. The workshops, the conferences, all that we did as well, that you've been such a big part of.
And the presentation. So what has been so much fun until COVID was that Jonathan would be asked to get together several of people that are in the book that happen to be either seriously local or local enough that they could come. And generally it was 4 people on a panel, and Jonathan would be the MC, so to speak, and ask the questions. And it was just, as many times as I did it, and as many times as I think the audience had heard some of these tales and stories, it was just fascinating every time. People were just enlivened by listening to people talk about their relationship to Pat Conroy.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, it's a wonderful collection. And the amount of, when you said, if we can all have that many people that are going to say something nice about us when we pass, I mean, it's not just simple little words. I mean, everyone puts their heart on the pages. And it's one that a couple of people have mentioned. They just will leave it on their bedside table and read one at night, and just relish on it and let it sit and process that. Melissa, what question do you have for Jonathan or Stephanie tonight?
So I'm going to skip, I guess halfway through the book and kind of segue into my question. I love the selection of photos that were included.
Oh, yes.
And so how difficult was that to choose them and, the sources?
A lot of them came from the Pat Conroy archive, which Pat and I established a couple of years before he passed away at the University of South Carolina. Pat was such a pack rat that he had every handwritten manuscript with just a couple of exceptions, and all of these wonderful photos that were on display. And we really wanted to make the public aware that there was a Conroy archive. So pulling photos from that source was a way to do that, of course. And there's, as you may have noticed, there's a photograph of young Stephanie in the collection as well, with Pat from the Beaufort High School yearbook, which was another great source for early photos of Pat. And then, of course, he was such a well-photographed author. He had done so many things that we really wanted to show him as celebrity too, engaging with audiences and just sort of, being old man tribal elder Pat Conroy. And there are some great photos of that, including from the Pat Conroy at 70 Festival, which we had October of 2015 as Pat's 70th birthday celebration, which in some ways is a blueprint for a lot of the things that we still do as the Conroy Center too. Right. So, for a man who had been in the spotlight really for 50 years, there's no shortage of photographs. It was coming down to which ones can actually tell this story visually, and ideally which ones also relate to the essays and the writers in this book. So it was nice to see a few of them featured in the photographs as well.
Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to hop on and read a comment that we just received from Shoshana Conway, who's watching from Texas. She mentions that she thought the title of the book was perfect, almost like it reflecting the Prince of Tides title, and loved the common theme of how much attention Pat would dedicate to each person, the advice he would give, and then even years later remembering that person and the circumstances having met them. Who does that for a couple of folks, much less a dozen or hundreds? he was sincerely interested in folks and their path in the world of writing. And she also just wanted to mention she so much enjoyed touring the Conroy Center last spring with us on the getaway and meeting you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for that, Shoshana.
You're so well said.
We're just learning. I think we're learning how. It's just an honor to learn from all of the people we've interacted with for the 2 years in my virtual book club, and the connection that we've created with you, Jonathan, and with the center just brings me joy. And Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit more about how you prepared yourself for writing your excerpt, and I can't say the word, in the book? Do you remember where your headspace was at when you started typing or writing the first few words?
Absolutely, because when the center started being formed, it seemed to be starting from after the Citadel on, like from Dufusky on. And luckily we had these fabulous photos because our ex-mayor, who was mayor for 20 years, and his brother actually did some kind of a white paper
it was a graduate course
for,
at Brandeis University for Billy Kaiser.
Right. And on education in South Carolina. And so the one was writing it and the other was taking the photographs. So we have actual photographs of Pat Conroy on Dufusky Island at that time, which is fabulous. But I knew him in high school. And I knew that this man who had gone to 10 schools in 10 years and finally landed in Beaufort, South Carolina for his junior and senior year, by the time the junior year was done and he was entering the senior year, he was everything. He was the senior class president. He was the May King. He was best all around. He was Mr. Congeniality, and he was the captain of the basketball team. He played basketball with my brother, so I used to go watch them practice and all that. Pat and I were in French class together, and we were on the literary magazine together. So I had a lot of interaction with Pat in those days. But he was just another kid at Beaufort High School, but definitely memorable. And I don't think that everybody necessarily realized, including Cassandra, because Cassandra did not know, his wife, Cassandra, did not know him back then. So I kept telling everybody. And when I did my tours, I think I probably brought that out a little bit more. And eventually Jonathan, I think said, oh, wow, yeah, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. And anyway, so when he asked me to write something, that made perfect sense to me to write what was very close to my heart at that time, which was knowing this wonderful author and knowing him beforehand and being able to express all of that about him. And that's his personality was that strong. And you got to think about it, going to 10 schools in 10 years. You don't have time to make friends that last until he landed here. And then things really changed.
So what a unique perspective. And thanks so much for sharing with us. I'm going to pass the mic to Melissa.
Yes, no, I love that. I love that. So would you, and we'll start with Jonathan, would you be willing to read part of your writings or another favorite from the book?
Sure, absolutely. I was showing Stephanie in the pre-show my instructor copy. Can you see that? It has all of my favorite passages flagged, which includes Stephanie's. But since she's probably going to read from hers, I'm going to read from mine tonight. And just as setup, let me explain kind of the context for this. Pat Conroy came into my life at a time when I didn't realize I even needed a mentor, but that's when the good ones show up sometimes. And he really took me under his wing. And we created this fiction imprint called Story River Books together. And Pat spent, really a huge part of the last 5 years of his life, when he could have been doing anything, working on this, making sure that other writers had a chance to be published, and that his own readers could be rallied and celebrate writers that he thought they needed to be introduced to. And we had spent so much time working on this, so many conversations over the phone or here in person in Beaufort. Pat was incredibly generous with that. But he realized that he was also going to be a guarantee of audience, that if we had, an evening that celebrated 3 writers with debut novels, maybe you'd get some people, but you wouldn't get several hundred people, like if you put Pat Conroy's name over the front of that. So he wanted to do these, an evening with Pat Conroy's Story River books featuring, and then whatever the writers were. And we would go and, have 300-400 people in attendance. And Pat would get on stage and he would be the MC. And he would say nothing whatsoever about himself. He would spend the whole time talking about the other writers. And in my introduction to the book, I wanted to capture that, because that sort of, the spirit of this book is to do the opposite, is to talk about Pat Conroy, is to let the other writers talk about Pat rather than letting Pat talk about all the other writers. So this is a remembrance and a short scene from one of those events when we did at up in Greenville, actually, at Furman University, Melissa, not far from where you are, probably. And this is about a page long. So this is it. Following a particularly lively evening with Story River books in front of an audience of several hundred at Furman University, Pat and I settled at a table in front of a long line of fans eager for his autograph. Pat signed for 3 hours that night, always striving to carry on a meaningful conversation with every reader in line, letting them know how much he treasured his audience. While the majority of books put in front of Pat were his own, he was delighted whenever a Story River book by another writer was extended to him to inscribe. At the end of the night, when all the other writers had left and only Pat, the venue staff, my wife, and I remained, Pat rose at last from the table and bellowed, "Haupt, I've never worked so hard in my life selling books by other writers." "Your writers," I corrected him. "Our writers," he corrected me, ever the good teacher. "And do you love it?" I asked him. He paused for a moment, just long enough for a twinkle, a chuckle, and a dropping of his curmudgeonly facade. Then came the truth-teller's honest answer. Yes, I do." Our Prince of Scribes is our collective return of Pat Conroy's faith in other writers, a giving back of the great love Pat entrusted in each of us, represented in this collection, and in so many others whose lives he touched and whose hearts he opened with the overarching message of his timeless body of work. You are not alone. Pat's legacy is still growing. His star is still ascending through his beloved books and through our remembrances of his instructive example, through the brilliant writings of the Story River Books family he forged and the even larger tribe of writers he inspired, and through the yeoman's work of the new Conroy Center established in his honor and in his stead. This collection is our gift to writers and to readers. We honor Pat by sharing his stories and our own, our truths as we know them to be. Tell me a story, Pat would say. These are the stories writers tell of Pat Conroy, our friend, our teacher, our Prince of Scribes.
Beautiful.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome. I haven't read that aloud in a while. I'm getting a little teary-eyed.
Wow.
A little emotional there, huh? That's acceptable.
Yeah.
Stephanie, would you like to follow?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Find mine.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I should have flagged that one for you too. It's near the front. You are one of the first.
David comes before or after David? That's all right.
Right there. Oh,
Oh, look
that.
at you.
I know. Look at that. Hanging
Oh,
out
great
there.
picture.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. So,
Sweet.
and that's exactly what I did. I titled mine, and I've already told you that he was best all around. And I titled mine that because reflecting back on Pat, all these years later. Now, I briefly mentioned that I worked in theater in New York City for 22 years, and I worked with some very, very wonderful, interesting celebrities over that time. And so Pat was semi a celebrity to me and semi just an old high school friend. And we have a lot of old high school friends here in Beaufort. So it's fun to go back and realize that Pat was as embraced in his senior year as he was. Best all around. Pat Conroy and I had at least 3 essential things in common. We went to Beaufort High School together in an era of BH history. defined by a remarkable group of educators, many of whom Pat immortalized. We were both military brats whose lives led us to the entrance and exits from multiple schools and friendships over the course of our education. And we both found ourselves such admirers of the written word that we became authors. At BHS, that's Beaufort High School, Pat and I learned about literature and the larger world from our English teachers, Jean Norris, Pat's story mentor, and Millen Ellis, homeroom teacher Grace Dennis, and principal Bill Dufford. In addition, Pat and I were in French class together we were section editors of the Breakers literary magazine. And I frequently watched as Pat and my brother Chris played one-on-one basketball after school and on weekends. Changing schools often was something we talked about years later. I went to 5 elementary schools, 3 junior highs, and 2 high schools. Pat changed schools every year until coming to Beaufort for his junior and senior years. In our later conversations, we shared that we felt arriving at the haven of Beaufort High School was a supreme gift in our lives. We got to stay in one place long enough to forge genuine friendships and glimpse the literary possibilities that would take shape in our adult lives. Many say that all of Pat's books center on his conflicted relationships with his father in one way or another. But to look at Pat's senior year annual, you'd never know he had a care in the world. Besides being a star athlete in baseball, basketball, and football, and captain and MVP of the basketball team, Pat was a member of the National Honor Society, and he was voted senior class president, best all around, May King, and Mr. Congeniality. As a docent at the Pat Conroy Literary Center, I am often asked by our visitors if I or any other Beaufort High School classmates recognized early on that Pat was destined for greatness. Of course not. We were all just awkwardly making our way through our teenage years. But when I look back at my high school annual, Pat's senior year and my sophomore year, I see a clue to the person he became. While most of our BHS classmates were scribbling generic phrases like, "Stay your sweet and cute self," Pat wrote in my annual these words: "Dearest Stephanie, good Frenching, the language that is, love, Pat." I blushed and laughed, and then, just as I did almost every time that we talked in the ensuing years. For a kid who had only come to Beaufort in his junior year, Pat was something else, and that wry personality, combined with the originality of his literary voice, made certain he would be something else the rest of his life. As a writer who also returned to make my home in Pat's beloved Beaufort, I've seen firsthand what the Literary Center established in Pat's honor has come to mean to so many so quickly. More than 2,500 people from 38 states and 8 countries made the pilgrimage to the center during the first year. After listening to our tour, many guests have offered their own stories of meeting Pat and of how he influenced their lives as readers, as writers, or simply as good citizens of the realm. Each story is distinctive, personal, and poignant. Sometimes it feels as though Pat is there with us, soaking up the love and guiding the experience for all of us here in Beaufort. Pat's home, his muse, and the town that first gave him what he needed to become, best all around.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That's fantastic. Both of your pieces are beautiful, and they do evoke that emotion for the reader that we talked about. That I think the entire culmination of all of these entries in the book create it, Princess Scribes, to be such a treat. I think my follow-up question to both of those readings would be, where would you like to see this book go next, or would there be a sequel to it? Or, it's been out for a few years, and there's been lots of awards, but what kind of dreams do you have for the continued sharing of our Princess Scribes with readers and book clubs and the country?
I'm amazed that we're here tonight still talking about this book, all these years after it came out. It was published in 2018. And as you all know, a book tour, goes somewhere between 2 weeks and 2 months. It does not span year after year after year. And I'm so grateful for that experience. And I'm so grateful that the spotlight continues to be shared on other writers too, that it's, it's about everybody who's involved in this book. Of the 67 writers who are in it, I think 54 of us have participated in at least one public event for it. Many of us multiple times. You probably almost as many as I have, which is a lot. And then for Nicole to have done the sketches that Stephanie mentioned, and for that exhibit to have lived, a second life separate from the book, and toured to 4 locations, including the convention of the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. So people, booksellers, literary folks, and writers from all over the South got to see it the year that it was at that conference. That was amazing too. And in the course of these panel discussions, we kept getting all of these audience questions that were really sort of specific about writing. And that led to the creation of the Our Prince of Scribes Writers Conference, which you've participated in how many times? 2, at least 2, maybe more than that. Yeah, and we did a bunch of those, including a hybrid one during COVID. So, my hope is that we continue to have opportunities like that, like we're doing tonight, to share these stories, not just our own, but on behalf of other people featured in the anthology as well. And that we get some more chances to do the writers' conference model or writers' workshops, because there are other folks who are in the book who are phenomenal teachers who haven't gotten the chance to teach their workshop under the umbrella of Our Prince of Scribes yet. And I'd love for them to do that. All of this collectively sort of reminds me of one of the first reader responses I got to the book. And it was from one of Pat's Beaufort High School students. And she said when she saw that Nicole and I and the other writers were working on this book, she knew immediately that she wanted to buy it, but she wasn't sure she ever wanted to read it because she didn't want to be sad 67 times. She said, as somebody who had known Pat for, what would that have been, almost 50 years, she saw aspects of him that she never had seen before. She heard stories she had never heard before. Because they weren't Pat's to tell, they were the writers to tell, and she got to know her friend, her teacher, in a new light, And I love that about this book. I mean, what can you say about a guy who wrote 12 books that are all either memoir or autobiographical fiction? It seems as though he covered all of it, but if you switch the perspective, if you allow another writer to share their story and their remembrance, you get a different set of insights into Pat. And I hope we get to continue to share those. Lots of folks certainly during the first couple of years the book was out, had asked about a sequel, had asked about, a second volume 2. And there are certainly more than 67 other writers out there who are not included in this book who were influenced by Pat Conroy, some of them quite well known. So if there's ever a conduit for folks that we didn't reach quite yet to share those stories, I would love to see them have the chance to do that too.
That would be exciting. Stephanie, what would you like to see the continued future of the book? What its role would be?
Interesting. While I was reading my own piece, you always have something else going on in your brain at the same time, it seems. And you may or may not be interested in it, but I and others reading the other stories in here, then I start thinking the other interesting things that happened between me and Pat. So I don't have just this one, right. Yeah. Because I moved back to Beaufort in mid his career, let's say. So it was an interesting time to get to know him again. And of course, he was just as generous as he had been, back in the high school days. But if we have a piece in here, we probably have more than one piece in our head in our relationship with him. Now, you could go to all new authors, or you could, spice it up with some other stories along the way. And in fact, I'll tell you how much this influences the people I know. A good friend moved from here up to the Charlotte area. So she's in North Carolina now. And she contacted me about a week and a half ago to say, Stephanie, would you do my book club? And really what I want you to do is talk about not only your book, but I want you to talk about the Conroy Center to my people. So I'm going to be doing that in early January. I'll be in my book came out the same year Pat passed. I am continuing to be asked to come and speak and talk about not only my book, but the Conroy Center in different venues. It's just, it's that much alive with everybody.
I mean, this is especially true of Stephanie, obviously, for reasons already that she's already discussed, and that her essay is about, that she's connected not just to Pat, but to our Conroy Center. But this seems to be what's happened with a lot of the writers in our Prince of Scribes. They sort of became ambassadors for the center, even if they aren't as overtly connected to it as Stephanie and I am. Even those who didn't know Pat that well, and that's a category too. I mean, Stephanie's absolutely right. There are a lot of folks in the book who knew Pat over a long period of time and have more than just the one story to tell. But there are also those handful of stories that I think of as the in-walked Conrack stories, which is, which I think is actually the title of Nikki Finney's story, where some writers, they're just convinced this has been an absolute mistake. They have no business being a writer, and nothing's ever going to happen. Whatever dreams they have been crushed by the realities of publishing or bookselling or whatever it is. And then in walks Pat Conroy, right, who they've never met before, but they recognize, and he doesn't know them, but he just sort of has this telepathic ability to recognize writers in jeopardy, and he's drawn to them. He says just the right thing in the right way, and he moves on, right? Like he's a hero of a 1960s road movie. He's got to go save the next town, right? But there are those writers who just have that one experience, but it was transformative for them. It saved their writing careers. It saved their enthusiasm for the business of storytelling. He was remarkable that he could do that. But he could also have these long-term sustained friendships with people like you too, in which perhaps there were gaps, but he could pick it up immediately the next time he saw you, right?
Didn't matter. Exactly. And think about 67, and that's not everybody.
Not even close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there was another comment. I just wanted to make sure everybody, Dunaway Lee's joined us, Jonathan, and she wanted to mention another favorite out of the book was Catherine Clark's My Exaggerated Life, because it seems such an authentic account of the real Pat Conroy. I've not heard it discussed, and I wondered what comments you might have about Catherine's entry. Do you have any off the top of your head?
Catherine's got a great essay in this book, which is really about, it's Pat being a teacher, and it actually overlaps with like one of the other writers in the book, if I'm remembering right. There's sort of a crossover with Sonny Brewer's essay. But Catherine, just to sort of clarify in response to the question, is an oral biographer. So she had done a couple of books that Pat were familiar with about interesting characters from Alabama, and she would interview them every day and transcribe the interviews, and then turn that not into a Q&A, not into a back and forth like we're doing tonight, but into a running narrative from the person that she had interviewed. And that was what Pat wanted her to do. He wanted that done on his behalf. So that became the book, My Exaggerated Life. And that resulted from interviews that Pat and Catherine had almost every day for an hour or 2 hours during the last maybe 2.5 years of Pat's life. And it came out after Pat passed away. And, for people who have read Pat's novels, but never had a conversation with him, never saw him in an interview, they're going to be drawn to how conversational that version of Pat's voice is versus his more literary voice, versus his more polished voice. The voice that Catherine captures so well in My Exaggerated Life is the late night phone call voice. It's the screen porch conversation, over cigars voice. It's informal Pat. It's the son of a fighter pilot who swears constantly. It's that Pat. But that's authentic Pat. That's very true to who he was too. So I love that that's captured there as well. And that book certainly has a lot of folks who appreciate it on that level. And I'm glad to have that opportunity to sort of hear that, to sort of feel like Pat is speaking directly to them. Of Pat's own books, the one that comes closest to matching that tone, at least to me, to my ear and my eye, is My Reading Life, which feels very personal, very immediate, very conversational. And maybe that's true for me because that book is about the very things that Pat and I would talk about: favorite books, favorite authors, and how you came to be familiar with them, how you came to be acquainted with them. So that to the degree that My Exaggerated Life has a cousin, let's say, among the book that Pat wrote himself, it's probably My Reading Life.
Thank you so much. That's a perfect segue to Melissa's next question. And this will be our last question. We're already out of time. How did that happen already? Goodness. Go ahead, Melissa.
Time flies. So I know it's a busy season, but we are always taking time to read. So Stephanie, what are you reading right now, please?
Well, I have switched over to audiobooks. I have found that to sit down in a chair with a book in my lap doesn't seem to be in my cards right now. So, golly, I'm reading Mindy Friedell's
Secret Keepers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
I am. And I was privileged to help run her workshop that she had here recently. And I, of course, got to absorb all at the same time. And I said, I've got to go find out exactly what it is she's writing and how she puts those sentences together. And it's fascinating. Yeah.
That's a fun book. There's an element of magical realism to it in terms of what flowers can and can't do and the way that they trigger memories for people who encounter them. So yeah, it's very clever, very well written. It's Willie Morris Award winner, Willie Morris Award for Southern Fiction. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you for that. And Jonathan, how about you?
So I just finished the book that is called Now Is Not the Time to Panic from Kevin Wilson, which I conveniently have right here on my desk. So, among other things, I'm very privileged to be an occasional book reviewer for the Charleston Post and Courier. And I read this in that context, having met Kevin at SCIBA, at the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. I think the same year the Our Prince of Scribes exhibit was there. And he was just fascinating to me. And this book is about two teenagers who sort of accidentally cause a version of the satanic panic. One is a young writer and the other is a young artist, and they create this unsigned broadside, which they circulate in their small town. And people react with paranoia and fascination. And then it circles back around in their adult lives. And Kevin just captures the wonderment and the power of being a young person creating something that the world is responding to, and then realizing this is potentially a dangerous power too. I can cause both good and evil with this creative power I have, and then having to reckon with that as adults many, many years later in their lives. It's a relatively brief book, but it covers so much so well that I just absolutely fell in love with it when I had the chance to read it and review it.
Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to give Jonathan and Stephanie a moment to talk about a unique workshop that we are doing together as part of the second annual Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway. Whichever one of you wants to start off, if you could tell us a little bit about the workshop you have planned for both my guests and also any of the authors that would like to attend as well. So go ahead.
Well, I do a workshop titled Creative Organization for Writers. I've been running a writers group here for 20 years now, twice a month. And I knew that for me to also, back in the days when I had regular jobs all the time, to stay on track, I needed somebody to help me stay on track. And so I started the writers group. And then I realized with the people who were coming and joining me, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know where their files were on their computers. They didn't know how to format a manuscript. They didn't know what genres really were. And actually, since I started, the genres have probably tripled. If you go to Amazon now, it's just amazing how many genres there are out there. They didn't know what a query letter was. They didn't know what a synopsis was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on. And the difference between self-publishing and publishing, in New York, so to speak. So I cover a lot of topics that are actually very helpful for somebody new. You don't have to be a new writer. You can have all the skills in the world, but you may not be informed of what the process is today. And then you need to make the decision: is this for you and your friends and your family, or is this going to be for something a little bit bigger? And what are the options out there? So I cover a lot of territory in a short amount of time that helps. I know I needed it, and I had to go out and find it myself. So I formed this workshop and have honed it over the years.
I've sat in on it a couple of times, and I will tell you that informally we refer to it as the "Get Your Shit Together" workshop. Not that ultimately is what it does for the folks who really want to be writers or want to make a sort of leapfrog movement in their existing writing lives, but they feel they have all these barriers. It kind of sorts through that for you. It gives you a roadmap and a toolkit and accountability in a way that is really just immediately beneficial and beneficial over the long haul as well. It's a really incredible workshop, and I'm glad that Stephanie's going to do it one more time for us.
And that might be even a surprise to Melissa. So the fact we're including this in the second annual Low Country Literary and Leisure Getaway was a little bit of the feedback that I took in and listened to. And the Saturday afternoon, the 25th of March, I hope that's right, Stephanie, is when we will hold that workshop at the Pat Conroy Literary Center and let the center again shine in what you do best. And that's, paying it forward and helping people learn and challenging all of us that may have a desire to do something, but just are kind of frozen in how to do it. I love your title of the workshop, Jonathan. We should just put that out there. But at this point, with that, I just want to thank Stephanie and Jonathan and Melissa for joining us for this conversation. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning of this our meeting, the last several years, we're going to go on year 3, which is amazing to me, has been so rewarding in the sense of community and the people that we've met. And I want to give you a heartfelt thanks for your time and effort for being here tonight. And just everybody do a closing comment, and then Melissa and I will stay on to do some book club business. And I want to wish you both, all of you, happy holidays. But I'll let Stephanie start, and then Jonathan, and then we'll say bye.
This has been really fun, and of course, all these things going through my head. But when Jonathan brings up the late night phone calls, we all have stories about Pat and his late night phone calls that can go on for an hour, hour and a half, whatever. And they're treasures. That they're personal to each of us, but they definitely are treasures to have his attention that long.
It was wonderful. I still have 10 of Pat's voicemails saved on my phone, and I always will. I have them archived elsewhere too. But when you saw that Pat's number would pop up on your phone, it was always a gamble, because one, you wanted to talk to him, but you knew it was going to be a long time. Okay. But if you didn't, you would get this beautiful voicemail message, and that too was a treasure. But it was pretty remarkable, the level of attention he would give writers. And that's what we try to honor in the book here at the Conroy Center as well. And it's a real pleasure to get to play our small role in the Low Country Getaway to Susie and Melissa. So we're so excited that we get to do that again in March, and so grateful that the Conroy Center is a beneficiary from the generosity of that experience and of the folks who come as well. And tonight has been just absolutely wonderful. So thank you both, Susie and Melissa, for this opportunity. It's fun to get to do this with you again. We haven't done one of these in a while. That's fun to do with you again.
So,
yes.
We haven't been on the road.
Any last comments, Melissa?
No, just thank you so much for being here and sharing and the brainstorming for potential future projects. I know everybody would just be at the waiting for anything that rolls out. So.
Thank you, Stephanie and Jonathan. Have a happy holiday.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oop. Sorry about that. I always feel like I'm But anyway, so I just wanted to recap with you a little bit, Melissa. I can't remember if I told you about that little workshop that's been added.
No, that's so exciting. And that speaks right to my core of being a process person. And I'm thinking, she was a military brat, military child. So I bet that kind of discipline and checklist kind of style really probably stems from that far back. So yeah.
Well, I'm excited. We just really wanted to add something that could be interactive between some of the featured authors and also the guests, and also an educational aspect to the overall offerings of the Low Country Getaway, which there's probably 2 more spaces for anybody out there that went, oh, wait, I want to go, please feel free to message me directly and we can try to get you registered and get everything reserved for March 22nd through 26th of 2023. And I wanted to remind everyone, and I don't have it next to me. Do you happen to have a copy of the cicada tree in your office?
I do not. I have my
Okay.
Prince of Scribes handy.
Okay.
I
Well, it's
don't have
okay.
that one.
So the next book that we're reading this month is this The Cicada Tree by David Gwaltney, and we will be talking with him in January. And then everyone know that in January we'll be reading The Prince of Tides, to play off of what we just did, our Prince of Scribes. And we'll be meeting with Jonathan again in February, right ahead of the getaway. So I just wanted everyone to know that we're still here. I need to give a email to Miss Stephanie to see if we could feature her with her novel in the future. And we've got a pretty strong, already the first 6 months of next year all lined up with previously recommended introduced authors to us. So everybody have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year. Stay warm, and just enjoy a book or an audio book whenever you can. Anything else you want to add, Melissa?
Well, just that I hope that everyone is making the New Year's resolution to read more.
That's appropriate. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for joining me again, Melissa. Tonight, it's been good having you as my wing woman or whatever we call that. Good to have you on again. And we'll be talking to everybody in the new year. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.